Welcome to Parshat Beha'alotecha. Finally, the Israelites start traveling. For nearly a year, they've been connecting with God at Sinai. God spoke to the people through divine revelation. They built the Mishkan, where God's cloud came to rest with the people. And they were given laws through which they'd be able to live with God, always and everywhere. And now, at what should be the apex of Israel's relationship with God, what would we expect to hear? Sinai was the wedding. The past year was the honeymoon phase. And now, we're settling in for a long life together, right? But that's not what we find at all. The very first thing that people do after they start moving is complain. Did they suddenly forget that they had just been so close with God? What's going on? And many of us struggle with this part of the Torah because it's just hard to relate to. We read the stories in the Torah and we fall into the trap of judging the people. We think, if I were around back then, I would never have sinned like that. But the Torah isn't an ancient history book. It's meant to have timeless lessons for all of us, from a shepherd in the time of David to a stockbroker in 2016. So how can we understand and relate to this seemingly ungrateful, chutzpadik nation? Join us as we explore this story and figure out what we're supposed to learn from it. This week on the Parsha Experiment. Hi, I'm David Block, and welcome to the Parsha Experiment. So, the people complained to Moses, Mi yachilenu basar, if we only had meat. Zacharnu et hadaga asher nochal b'Mitzrayim chinam. We remember all the fish that we ate in Egypt for free. Ve'ata nafshenu yivesha, ein ko bilti el haman einenu. And now, our souls are dried out. We have nothing except for the manna. And so, God gives them slav, quail. Okay, so the people are about to travel, and they complain about food. Does that remind us of anything? Look back at Exodus as the Israelites arrive in the desert. Despite their horrific experiences in Egypt, despite God having just rescued them, they complain. If only we died in Egypt. Ki hotzeitem otanu el hamidbar hazeh lahamit et kol hakahal hazeh b'ra'av. You brought us to this desert just to die of hunger. Look at that. Both stories take place at the beginning of Israel's travels in the desert. In Exodus from the Sea of Reeds, and in Numbers from Sinai. And in both stories, the people long for food. And there's another similarity. Back in Exodus, God gives the people manna in response to their hunger, but he also gives them something else. Vayhi va'erev v'tal haslav v'tachas et hamachaneh. At night, the quails came up and covered the camp. And those same two foods are the focus in Numbers too. At some point after the story in Exodus, the quail stops. And now, in Numbers, the people complain that all they have is manna, which has continued to feed the Israelites since that very first story. And in response, Ve'agaz salvim min hayam, vayitosh ala machaneh. The wind brought forth quails from the sea, and they fell by the camp. The similarities don't stop there. Not only is the content of the complaint similar, but they both follow the same structural formula. In Exodus, they said, Mi yitain mutenu biyad Hashem be'eretz Mitzrayim. If only we had died in Egypt. Then, they reminisce about how good it was back in Egypt. B'shiftenu al sir habasar, ba'ochlenu lechem lesova, as we sat over our pots of meat, and were full with bread. But now, You've brought us out to the desert, only to die of hunger. Those three elements, if only, reminiscing about Egypt, and then a description of how dire their current state is, are exactly replicated in the complaint in Numbers too. Mi ya'achilenu basar, if only we had meat. Then, Zacharnu et hadaga asher nochal b'Mitzrayim chinam. We remember all the fish that we ate in Egypt for free. And the cucumbers and watermelons and leek and onions and garlic. But now, ve'ata nafshenu yivesha, ein ko bilti el haman einenu. Our souls are dried out, we have nothing except for the manna. But there are also some jarring differences. In Exodus, they actually have no food. They're scared they'll die of starvation. But in Numbers, that's not true at all. They've had manna since the Exodus story. And yet, They complain as if the situation is the same. We're dried out, ein kol, we have nothing. Bilti el haman einenu, except for this manna. And look at God's response to the two complaints. In Exodus, God seems to understand the people. Oh, you're hungry? Here's food. He simply provides them with what they ask for. But God's reaction in Numbers couldn't be more different. Vayichar af Hashem ma'od, God was enraged. And ultimately, vayach Hashem ba'am makar rabba me'od, God struck the people with an extremely severe blow. So what's going on here in Numbers? Why do the people complain about food again, even though they already have food? And why does God react so differently to their complaint? The key may be in one last difference between the two stories. In Exodus, after the people complain, God says to Moses, Shamati et tlunot b'nei Yisrael, I've heard the complaints of the people. Taber alehem lemor, bein arbayim tochlu basar, uvaboker tispa'u lachem. Tell them that at night they'll eat meat, and in the morning, bread. Vidatem ki ani Hashem Elokechem, so that they'll know that I'm God. What does that mean, so they'll know that I'm God? How could they not know? As we discussed back in Beshalach, after God took the people from Egypt, they doubted whether God was really with them, whether he would lovingly provide for them. And while the people perhaps should have believed, it seems that God understood that skepticism. After all, at that point, though he did save them, it was really all through destruction. God annihilated Egypt through the plagues. He obliterated their army at the Sea of Reeds. So yes, God is powerful, but loving? They had no idea what a loving God even was. God says, I get it. I'll show you that I'm with you, that I love you. I'll provide for you, tenderly, lovingly, with food. I'll give you manna and quail, and then I'll be with you at Sinai, and we'll spend a year getting close to each other. But now look at Numbers. It didn't work. They still doubt. How is that possible? Maybe there's something deeper there. Maybe it was never really about faith in God. It was something else, masked in an issue of faith. And if that's the case, perhaps whatever the real issue was, that continued, even into Numbers. We think that the ultimate answer lies in the details of the first manna story in Exodus. When God provided the manna, it was given with two restrictions. First, when they collected each day, v'laktu davar yom biyomo, they could only take exactly the amount they'd need for that one day. And secondly, v'hechinu et asher yaviu, v'haya mishneh. They would collect double on Friday, but would not collect at all on the Sabbath. But why? I mean, what if they get hungry later? What is God trying to tell us by restricting how much and when we can take manna? Let's say I'm an Israelite. God just freed me from Egypt with incredible wonders. Now I'm in the desert, where God tells me, I know you don't have anything, but don't worry, I'll take care of you. Well, that's nice, but it's also scary, because I have no control. Forget about going to the grocery store to buy food, I can't produce anything. I can't even plant or harvest. I'm completely in the hands of God. I have no control. And we humans have a natural desire to be in control, because in our minds, control is a security. We want physical security, so we set up alarm systems. We want financial security, so we put our money into banks or in rock-solid investments. Because when we don't have security, when we're not in control, we are exposed, unprotected. We're utterly vulnerable. But there's a deeper level of vulnerability, emotional vulnerability. In this new relationship God is building with us, where he does everything from taking us out of Egypt to providing us with breakfast every morning, God says, this isn't going to work unless you're completely open to being in this relationship with me. I'll provide for you, of course I will. But you must give up control. Let yourselves be vulnerable and put your complete trust and love in me. So only take what you need for that day, not a morsel more. And if you can trust me, I'll never let you down. So when they complained back in Exodus, it wasn't only about a lack of food. And of course, they didn't actually want to go back to Egypt. At the heart of it all, there was a paralyzing fear of being vulnerable. In Egypt, at least they knew where their next meal was coming from. And now, it's all up to God. Now, let's come back to beha'lotecha. This time, there's no worry of starvation. God has been providing them with food. They're just sick of manna. But there's something odd. Right after the complaint, the verses go into great detail about how the people would prepare the manna. V'tachanu varichayim odachu b'madocha. They'd grind it and pound it. Uvishlu b'parur v'asu oto ugot. They cooked it and they made cakes. The people are trying to process the manna, to put their own human stamp on it. They're trying to take control. They say that the issue is lack of food choice, but at its core, the people just don't want to rely on heavenly bread. We don't want to be completely vulnerable to God. It's precisely the same underlying issue of their complaints back in Exodus. And just like last time, it means something bigger. God, we're not ready to be completely vulnerable to you. And God's incredibly disappointed. That's why God responds so harshly. God says, I knew you were nervous to be completely vulnerable, to cede all control. So I was patient. I provided for you. I gave you rules to ease you into it, to help you learn that you can give up control, that you can rely on me. When I gave you food in the desert for the first time, I told you, if you follow in my ways, if you put your trust in me, Kol hamachala asher samti b'Mitzrayim lo asim alecha. All the destruction that I brought upon Egypt, I won't bring that upon you. I'll take care of you. You just have to let yourselves be vulnerable. But after all that, you still reject me. And therefore, in this week's Parsha, the relationship breaks down, and the people are met with that very destruction God warned them about. At the heart of the issue, both of these stories are about being vulnerable in our relationship with God. And that's a challenge we can certainly relate to. We try to control each detail of our lives, and we have such trouble relinquishing that control. Because yes, when we're vulnerable, we're exposed. We can get hurt. But it's also only through that vulnerability that we can build a deep and close relationship. Only when we trust God to love us and take care of us can we ultimately reach that epic level of closeness with God.
Hi YouTube, thanks for watching. Don't forget to subscribe to our channel. And for even more amazing Torah videos, check out aleph-beta.org. Just click the link below.